What's going on, everyone? With week 10 having wrapped up, you know what time it is. I have got my weekly NFL game picks outright against the spread, along with my locks of the week for week 11 in the NFL. So let's get right into it. We start with Thursday Night Football, where we have the Green Bay Packers at the Seattle Seahawks. Green Bay 4-1 after a much-needed victory last week at Lambeau versus the Miami Dolphins in a game where they just took care of business. However, this week could be different as the Packers have to travel all the way to Seattle, face the Seahawks in that home environment where they are a different team behind that 12th-man crowd. And speaking of the Seahawks, they're 4-5 after another tough loss to the Rams. We predicted it would be a close game. It was exactly that. The Seahawks gave the Rams a run for their money, but ultimately the Rams too talented and they got the victory. But as far as this matchup goes, both these sides have plenty of talent, especially offensively, but both are on the outside looking in as far as the playoffs are concerned in the NFC. I do think that one of these two teams can vie for that last spot in the wild card, and that's why this game is so important because neither is heavily favored out of these two teams. I think that's pretty accurate, and I think both of these sides can potentially get the victory here. That's again why this game means so much for the Packers and the Seahawks. As far as breaking down the matchup goes, look, contrary to popular belief, I think that the team that runs the football better here will win the game, and that does it more consistently. We know the bread and butter for the Packers is passing the football with Aaron Rodgers, but we saw the success they had with Aaron Jones taking the reins last week and dominating. If they can do the same thing this week and give him the bulk of the carries, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Packers win because they do have an advantage in the passing attack. However, we do know that Seattle, well, rushing the football is what they've been doing best these last couple of weeks, and they've been doing it better than almost anyone, honestly. Chris Carson was injured last week. That didn't matter. Rashad Penny reemerged. Mike Davis did his thing. Now, reports are Carson should return, and he is the main running back when he is healthy. But I do think all those three guys have a role to play offensively. Hopefully, the Seahawks realize that, in my opinion, Chris Carson is the best back out of the bunch, and, they don't limit his carries too much. I do think if they get away from that game script, it could potentially hurt them if they try and reinsert Rashad Penny in that offense a little bit too early. We'll see. It will be interesting. But look, ultimately, I have a little bit more faith in the Seahawks rushing the football. They've been doing it more consistently, plain and simple, for several weeks now. And I do think there is something to be said about that home field advantage in Seattle. I think this will be a very close game. I think it'll come down to the last parts of the fourth quarter. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in a game-winning field goal. And, the spread here, -2.5, really tough to predict. I do like the Seattle Seahawks outright, but I'm going to hedge my bets here a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 2-point margin of victory, something like that, maybe even 1 point. We'll see. But I'm going to take the Packers on the spread. I realize the spread is very low, but I just have a feeling it's going to be a very tight game. And again, the Packers could make some magic happen if they get Aaron Jones going. Next, we have the Dallas Cowboys at the Atlanta Falcons. Both these teams are 4-5, but got here in different ways looking at the results from last week. The Cowboys victorious in a divisional road game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And honestly, anytime you could do that versus a divisional opponent, that is a great victory, and that was just the case for the Cowboys, especially in a year where the NFC East is still up for the grabs. Whereas the Falcons, man, they just fell flat versus the Cleveland Browns in a game that meant so much, especially considering how hard they worked to recoup some of the momentum they had lost due to that slow start at the beginning of the season. But look, good news for the Falcons is they return home. And that's a big deal because they play a lot better at home in that stadium. Matt Ryan is a completely different quarterback in that environment. He puts up those MVP type numbers there. And honestly, he's going to need to here because by all accounts, this is practically an elimination game. And the good news here is we've got a couple of these games this week, so it'll be interesting to watch all of them. And this game is no exception. It might be at the top of the list because both teams, again, have a chance to win this game. But let me make it clear. I like the Falcons here. I realize the Cowboys looked very impressive last week. Zeke ran wild. Dak looked good. Amari Cooper has added a true wide receiver to that offense. But Dak versus Matt Ryan, that's what this comes down to. I'm taking Matt Ryan and Julio Jones all day. Julio Jones is starting to get it going. He's finally finding the end zone, and that spells trouble for opposing defenses. That's going to open up things for guys like Calvin Ridley, for Sanu, for Coleman, for everyone, Hooper included. So for that reason, I'm taking the Atlanta Falcons offense here. To me, they've just been more consistent, especially at home. Like I said, I don't know what we're going to get from the Dallas Cowboys. You know, they have a tendency to, from time to time, just forget their best player in Ezekiel Elliott exists in crucial moments. So we'll see if that's the case this week. But I do think it will be an entertaining contest, primarily because the Atlanta Falcons defense is one that can be exposed, and I see the Cowboys having success there. That's why this should be a close game, but on paper, I like the Falcons. To me, they have enough talent offensively to diffuse what the Cowboys can do defensively. So like I said, I like them outright on the spread, -3.5. Give me the over here on the Falcons. I think they can win when it comes to the end of the game by a touchdown or more. Moving on, we have got an AFC divisional clash with the Cincinnati Bengals at the Baltimore Ravens. The Bengals 5-4, but coming off a horrendous loss to the New Orleans Saints where they gave up 50+ in a game that was just hard to watch. And honestly, it was very reminiscent, like we predicted, of a matchup earlier in the season versus the Kansas City Chiefs, where the Bengals had about one good series, and then that was all she wrote. But either way, looking at the Baltimore Ravens on the other side of this matchup, they're coming back from the bye week. Usually that would be a good thing because you have time to heal up from some nagging injuries, but they're trending in the opposite direction as Joe Flacco appearing on numerous injury reports. It's a very real possibility he won't be available for that matchup, and that is a big deal because that means it's either going to be Lamar Jackson or RG3. And that means it's either going to be a rookie facing the Bengals or someone that hasn't had a meaningful game in several years as a starting quarterback. I realize the Bengals defense has not been good, and that's putting it lightly, but make no mistakes about it. This is an advantage for them because Joe Flacco knows that defense a lot better. And even though I could see the Ravens still putting up some points here, I do think there will be some mistakes made by the other quarterbacks if it comes to that. And I do think that is a boost for the Bengals in an area where they have been struggling defensively. Now, the other big storyline here, AJ Green likely will miss this game again. And we saw some issues with that last week. Maybe one could say that's why they had some troubles offensively. Personally, I just think that that was the wrong type of game to get into. The Saints can do that to a lot of different teams. I think it would have honestly been a similar type of outcome whether AJ Green was there or not. So I'm honestly not too worried about that. I still think Tyler Boyd can have a good game. I think Joe Mixon will be a factor as well. It will be a close game in my opinion. These divisional games usually are. The Baltimore Ravens defense should do some nice things. But honestly, this comes down to Andy Dalton versus potentially no Joe Flacco. And in that scenario, and it sure seems to be trending that way, I would take the Cincinnati Bengals. Right now, the Baltimore Ravens are favored in this game, -3.5. But like I said, I like the Bengals outright as long as this Joe Flacco news keeps trending this way, and I will take them on the spread as well. Continuing on, we've got the Carolina Panthers at the Detroit Lions. The Panthers 6-3, coming off their own 50-point blowout loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And they pretty much said, well, Cincinnati, anything you can do, we can do better. Just watch this. No, not really, though. Just having some fun there. The Panthers face the Detroit Lions, like we said. The Lions 3-6. They have a tough outing here because not only did they lose last week to the Chicago Bears, tough divisional loss, but they also potentially might be without Marvin Jones, bone bruise. He will be questionable. And in a receiving core that was already depleted without Golden Tate, this is a big deal. Will most likely be the Kenny Golladay show. He will get a lot of coverage going his way. Theo Riddick will likely get some increased opportunities, and potentially could be a long day for Matthew Stafford, who has been getting sacked a bunch these last couple of weeks, and that is the strength of the Panthers defense. That front seven, they can apply some pressure. Good news for Stafford, however, is that Panthers secondary can be exposed. We've seen it happen several times this season. We definitely saw it with the Steelers, but ultimately I do think it'll be too much to overcome with the Lions here because of the pieces they will be missing offensively. Cam, I think, he's still got his high ceiling performance-wise. That was just matchup-wise tough with the Steelers game. Christian McCaffrey had a great day, but Cam Newton was limited in his performance. A game that just didn't go right for the Panthers, but I do think they get back on track here. I think they'll be able to have a nice offensive performance. Ultimately, I predict something in the realms of 30 to 20, something around there for the Carolina Panthers. I like them to win this game outright. Detroit Lions plus 3.5 on the spread. I think it'll be close to a touchdown as far as the margin of victory for the Panthers, so give me the Panthers on the spread. Next, we have another AFC divisional clash with the Tennessee Titans at the Indianapolis Colts. The Titans 5-4 after a win where not a lot of people saw it coming versus the New England Patriots in a game that wasn't that close. Great win for the Titans. Whereas the Indianapolis Colts 4-5 also coming off a nice win, divisional one at that, versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Andrew Luck was able to get it done once again. And look, even though the Titans have made some nice strides, they're above 500. They've got the better record here. Marcus Mariota has looked good for now 2 weeks straight. Derrick Henry has had some success. I still like the Colts offense better. The Titans, if you look at this record, it's kind of eerie, but in games where Andrew Luck has started, the Titans are winless versus the Colts. And I'm not really basing this prediction off of that. I'm more so looking at the offensive potential, and the Colts have been a lot more consistent here. Andrew Luck versus Marcus Mariota, give me a healthy Andrew Luck in that department. I think, he will be able to do some really nice things. A lot of mismatches there with the tight ends. We know how much Luck likes his tight ends with Ebron or Doyle. He has got options there. T.Y. Hilton, Marlon Mack potentially, even though the Titans do have a good run defense. So I do think it will be more of an aerial showdown. But at the same time, I do expect the Titans to get their own opportunities here. We all know that Indianapolis defense can be exposed. It will be exposed, and it is exposed. We saw it with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had an offensive outing versus the Colts, even though it was in a loss last week. But ultimately, at home, I will take the Colts here. I like the Andrew Luck factor, and I like them outright. On the spread, they are favored minus 2.5. I'll take the over. I think the Colts can get this victory by at least a field goal. Moving on to a bit of a less compelling matchup, we've got the Tampa Bay Bucks at the New York Giants. The Bucks are 3-6 after a head-scratching loss to the Washington Redskins, where they put up over 500 total yards of offense, but only mustered 3 points. That's crazy. Now, they face the New York Giants, who got their second victory of the season, 2-7 versus the San Francisco 49ers. OBJ had a big day. I look for Saquon Barkley to have a big day versus this Bucks defense. He's been doing pretty good, but I expect a loud statement here. And I do think the Bucks, I would rather go with Ryan Fitzpatrick. I give him the edge as far as quarterback play goes, but I'd rather have the offensive pieces of the New York Giants. And then defensive-wise, I give the edge to the New York Giants. So overall, I think the scale does favor New York here. Also a home game for them, but that at this point, not that big of a factor considering how these two teams have played. So I will say, give me the New York Giants. I think they have more offensive firepower. I think their skill position players are bigger difference makers, and I think that's what it's going to come down to. So I like the Giants outright. As far as the spread goes, it's a pick 'em. It's minus half a point. So because of that, I will take the Giants on the spread as well. Next, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Steelers 6-2-1 after that dismantling of the Carolina Panthers, while the Jaguars 3-6 after a close loss versus the Indianapolis Colts. And look, it did seem like the Jaguars regained some life with the reemergence of Leonard Fournette returning from injury. He had a nice day as well, but ultimately Bortles just wasn't able to go ahead and outduel Andrew Luck, and he did have a good game, but ultimately I think that's what will happen again here versus Big Ben and the Steelers. Big Ben has been having a hell of a season, and those road woos that we've seen earlier years past haven't really been that big of an issue this year. And that Jacksonville Jaguars defense, for all the talk heading into the season, it has been very exposable this year. We saw it again last week. I think the Steelers can do just the same versus the Jags defense. I look for Antonio Brown, Juju Smith, and of course now the official starting running back of the Pittsburgh Steelers, James Conner. After all that Le'Veon Bell drama officially put to bed, we know Conner will control that backfield, and that's not an issue. He was playing at an extremely high level. Those concussion talks are not an issue either. He had full practice this week, so he will be available for the Steelers. Offensively, I give the edge to the Steelers. Defensively, the Steelers have also been playing pretty good as of late, and compared to how the Jaguars have looked these last several games defensively, got to give the edge to the Steelers there. So pretty much all around, I like the Steelers to win this game. I see a big game for James Conner, for Big Ben. I think ultimately those are going to be the guys that outduel Blake Bortles and Leonard Fournette, their counterparts, and that's what will get the Steelers this victory. I like them outright. On the spread, Jacksonville plus 5.5. Give me the over here. I think the Steelers win it by a touchdown. Continuing on with a clash of two divisional leaders, and one that might be flying under the radar a little bit, we've got the Houston Texans at the Washington Redskins. Both these teams 6-3. The Texans coming off of their bye week, while the Redskins returning at home after that victory versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And here, I do predict a lower scoring game. We have seen the Texans be somewhat inconsistent offensively. It's going to really depend on what kind of pressure the Washington Redskins can bring, and if they can get to Deshaun Watson. And then we've seen it all year with Alex Smith. He has been wildly inconsistent, so I don't have too many high expectations from Smith and that offense of the Redskins, which has had its fair share of issues. I'm surprised that they were able to put up 16 points last week versus the Bucs, considering how many issues they had on the offensive line. We'll see if that carries over. That Houston Texans defense, I think they will get after Alex Smith. Ultimately, I like the Texans in this game. I like their offensive pieces a lot more so, led by DeAndre Hopkins and Deshaun Watson. And then defensively, I think the mismatch between that D-line of the Texans and that Washington O-line will just be too much to overcome for the Redskins. Texans ultimately get the win here on the road. I like them outright. As far as the spread goes, plus 2.5 for the Redskins. When you consider, I think, what that defense will be able to do, I think there will be some turnovers to be had here. I like the Texans on the spread. I will take the over there. Next, we have another AFC divisional clash with the Denver Broncos at the LA Chargers. The Broncos 3-6 after coming off of their bye week face the Chargers, who were victorious versus the Raiders last week. They're 7-2. It can potentially be getting Joey Bosa back this week. That's a big deal. Still a little bit early to tell, but if that is the case, man, we all know how much of a stud he is, and surely he will be a welcome addition to that defense and someone that Case Keenum will have to watch out for. As far as the big matchup in this game, I look at Case Keenum versus Phillip Rivers. I give Rivers the edge here. He's been more consistent all season long. That offense has been performing at a higher level all season long with Allen and with Melvin Gordon. Whereas the Denver Broncos, who will step up after the departure of Demaryius Thomas? We know Sanders will get his. Will it be Courtland Sutton? Will the tight end and Jeff Ironman continue to play at the level that we saw versus the Houston Texans? I think that's unlikely. So for this reason, I will take the Chargers to win this game at home. I like them outright. As far as the spread is concerned, minus 7.5. Honestly here, that's a little bit high for me. I think in this divisional contest, I will go with the under on the spread. I think the Broncos will be able to surprise some people and keep it somewhat closer than expected. Maybe some garbage time points, we'll see, but I think it'll be right at a touchdown because of that extra half point. I will take the under. Moving on, we've got the Oakland Raiders at the Arizona Cardinals. The Raiders 1-8 after that loss to the LA Chargers, whereas the Cardinals, not to be outdone, also coming in from a loss versus the Kansas City Chiefs, but they did keep it a lot closer than some people expected, including myself. That is the bright side here. But overall, let's not kid ourselves. These two teams have 3 combined wins between each other, and ultimately, they have called it a season. And what they're playing for here really is the NFL draft. Who will have that first pick overall? And I do think the Raiders are in the driver's seat there. Offensively and defensively, they are nowhere to be found. Now they have a road game versus the Cardinals, who did show some signs of life in that rushing attack, led by David Johnson. You know, it goes to show what some changes in the middle of the season can do, especially if the coach running the show isn't the best fit and isn't utilizing his players a la what we were seeing with David Johnson. I do think David Johnson will have a strong finish to the season, and I expect a big performance from him here versus that Raiders defense. I think this Cardinals win will be led by David Johnson. He is the most talented piece offensively for the Cardinals, and I expect the Cardinals to also have a decent performance defensively behind that home crowd as well. I like the Cardinals to win this matchup outright. As far as the spread is concerned, -3.5. I will take the Cardinals right now. I just have zero faith in that Oakland offense and in that Oakland defense, so I'm taking Arizona outright and on the spread. Continuing on, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles at the New Orleans Saints. The Eagles 4-5 after that loss versus the Dallas Cowboys. Disappointing one. I thought the Eagles would be able to do better and get the victory there, but alas, no one really showed up outside of Zach Ertz and Carson Wentz offensively. The Eagles defense, not the same as what we saw last year, and Zeke was able to run wild on them and get that victory for the Cowboys. And unfortunately so for the Eagles, now they have to face the New Orleans Saints, who in my book are the best team in the NFL. They come into this game 8-1 after humiliating the Cincinnati Bengals. Home game for the Saints. Look, they're dangerous on the road, at home, but they are more so dangerous at home with that crowd behind them. I like Drew Brees in this game. I love that Saints offense, even without Dez Bryant. I mean, we never really saw him take the field. Unfortunate with that injury that he sustained. But ultimately, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Mark Ingram will be more than plenty to take care of business versus the Eagles. Drew Brees is having an MVP season. I think that continues versus the Eagles. And I do think the New Orleans Saints defense also could have a nice game here versus Carson Wentz at home. I look for the Saints to win this game outright. On the spread, the Saints -8.5. And honestly, the way the Saints have been playing this season, the way they've been blowing out their opponents by almost double-digit scores week in and week out, I'm going with the Saints here. I like them to win this game by around 10 points. Give me the Saints on the spread. Getting to Sunday Night Football, we've got the Minnesota Vikings at the Chicago Bears. NFC divisional clash, a game that got flexed to Sunday night, so you know it has some real playoff implications. Starting with the Vikings, they're 5-3-1, coming off the bye week, facing the division-leading Chicago Bears, who are 6-3 after beating the Detroit Lions. In looking at this matchup, look, I like what the Minnesota Vikings have more so than the Chicago Bears. And look, call me a hater, but I just need to see a statement win from the Chicago Bears first before I am sold on them, because looking at the teams that they have beaten, I'm just not impressed, okay? Seattle Seahawks, they beat them before they had figured out the rushing attack, so, you know, I don't put too much stock in that win, and that was a win in which Seattle almost came back to beat them. Versus the Arizona Cardinals, who only have 2 wins at this point in the season, Cardinals almost came back to beat the Bears. Versus the Tampa Bay Bucks, they blew them out, but that was a horrible defense. Then versus the Buffalo Bills, same deal. That was a defensive effort that was led by the Chicago Bears. Versus the Jets, that was a close game where the Jets almost came back on them. And then this last week, beating the Detroit Lions. I think that was their best win of the season so far. I realize Mitchell Trubisky has looked good, but he hasn't faced a defense, especially a pass defense like this yet. The Vikings have a lot of talent defensively. Kirk Cousins can go ahead and ball out. He's got Stephon Diggs. He's got Adam Thielen. I think he takes some chances, but at the same time, he takes chances and they pay off, especially with the kind of wide receivers that he has. Dalvin Cook back, at least healthy on paper. We'll see how long that lasts, but that is a boost for that Minnesota Vikings offense as well. And as good as that Bears offense has looked as of late, especially what we saw versus the Lions, how good Matt Nagy has looked and turned around that offense and that team in general, and the presence of Khalil Mack, I'm giving the edge to the Minnesota Vikings. I need to see the Chicago Bears play a real team first. And look, I'm going to go on record and say if the Bears get this victory, however it is, whether it's a 1 point, 2 point, 7 point, 14 point kind of margin of victory, I'm going to be the first one to come out here and eat crow and give the Bears all the credit they deserve. But up until they play, in my opinion, an upper echelon team, I'm not ready to go ahead and crown them as the NFC champs of the North. So for that reason, I'm going with the Vikings here. I like them outright. On the spread, -2.5 for the Chicago Bears. They're at home. That will be a nice advantage, but ultimately, I'm going with Kirk Cousins over Mitchell Trubisky and that Minnesota defense. I think Trubisky won't be able to duplicate the efforts he's had up until now versus this Minnesota defense. And on the spread, -2.5 for the Bears. Give me the Vikings on the spread since I like them outright as well. Finally, getting to Monday Night Football in what could be one of the most anticipated games of the year. We've got the Kansas City Chiefs at the LA Rams. Originally supposed to be played in Mexico City, but because of field conditions, moved to LA. So that should be an advantage for the Rams, as reflected by the spread, which is -2.5 for the Rams. Both these teams 9-1, tied for the best record in the NFL. The Chiefs taking care of business versus the Arizona Cardinals last week, while the Rams beating the Seattle Seahawks in a close game. And breaking down this matchup, it will be one of an offensive-minded football game because we know all the talent these two teams have offensively. Now, Patrick Mahomes versus Jared Goff. I like what Patrick Mahomes can do a little bit more because of the arm talent he has with that deep ball. Offensively, I would have given the edge to the Rams, but that Cooper Kupp injury, I do think it will be a big blow for that Rams offense. They do have the guys needed to replace him with Robert Woods and Brendan Cooks. Todd Gurley is, a stud. As a running back, the fact that he is in MVP considerations tells you all you need to know. I love Kareem Hunt and everything he's been able to do, but Todd Gurley right now is playing as the best running back in the NFL. No questions about that. With the Chiefs, what I really like there is Tyreek Hill, how he can stretch the field. Travis Kelce, what he can do. Sammy Watkins potentially returning for this game. That would be huge. And ultimately, I'm going to give the edge to the Chiefs here. So far, some things that really worry me about the Rams. The defensive effort they've shown these last couple of weeks. We saw it with the Green Bay Packers game. We saw it with the New Orleans Saints game. We saw it versus the Seattle Seahawks. They really need a guy like Aqib Talib back. And it's crazy to think that with guys like Sue and Aaron Donald, how bad the Rams have been against the run. I think Kareem Hunt will have a big game here. Hopefully the Chiefs feature him. And if that is the case, I think the Chiefs can win this game. I think it'll be a close game. I think it will be one that is obviously very high scoring, gets decided late in the fourth quarter. But ultimately, I like the Chiefs in this game. Give me Kansas City outright. On the spread, like I mentioned, -2.5 for the Rams. I will take the Chiefs there too. So with that, we finish our pick'em games. Now looking at our locks of the week, we start with the Carolina Panthers at the Detroit Lions. Give me the Panthers simply because I think the Detroit Lions are way too depleted offensively at the wide receiver position. I think the Panthers will be able to take advantage of some mismatches on that offensive line. I think that front seven will be able to make up for the lack of production they can sometimes have in the back part of that defense. I like the Panthers to go into Detroit, win this game. Next, Pittsburgh at Jacksonville. Give me the Pittsburgh Steelers. Right now, the Steelers are just clicking on all cylinders. They have one of the most potent offenses in all of football. I think the combo of James Conner and Big Ben outplays Blake Bortles and Leonard Fournette. That's what it comes down to, and Steelers win this game when it's all said and done. Then, Oakland at Arizona. Give me the Arizona Cardinals. I think the Oakland Raiders at this point have called it a season. Cardinals, they've shown some nice things these last couple of weeks. I think this game will be led by David Johnson. He gets them the victory here. And finally, Philadelphia at the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, like I said before, I think they're the best team in the NFL. Drew Brees, MVP-like season. Alvin Kamara, Ingram, Michael Thomas. They take care of the Eagles at home in New Orleans. They get the victory. So with that, we finish up our locks of the week as well. And as always, let me know what you guys thought. Did you agree with disagree with these picks, with the locks, let me hear it in the comments section, along with any other questions you guys might have. I'll do my best to answer them. And as usual, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.